All right, so my name is James Stewart. I'm going to be talking about creating AutoPkg recipes from scratch. I'm really going to cover how to do this for Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, all three, and kind of show how they're connected and related and how you can do the same in your environment. Really, the goal here is to show how you can use AutoPkg for just about anything, and hopefully that will inspire you to do awesome work and awesome stuff. So I don't know if anyone's ever mentioned this before, or if you're not aware of it. If you're on the, who here is on the Mac Admin Slack? I assume all of you, or hopefully all of you. So if you're on the Mac Admin Slack, there are channels, or if that's what they're called, I don't even know, for the conference and for this specific room. So if you join PSU Mac 207, you can chit chat with everyone here in this room, and there's links to a shared Google Doc where you can all take notes collaboratively together on this talk and any other talk in whichever room you're in. You can hop in whichever one you're currently in for the session that you're currently in, and so you can kind of ask questions amongst yourselves, commentary, stuff like that. So it's pretty useful tool. If you've never used it before, I would recommend it. Who all has been using this at the conference so far? Who didn't even know that this was a thing? Okay, wow, a lot of you. Okay, so if you're not in these channels already, you go into the Mac Admin Slack, and you don't have to search for channel, just type in like PSU Mac dash, and it should bring up the list, and then you can join the room for your thing. Probably should be covering this on some of like the morning setup for the conference stuff to let people know, but it's a really useful tool. All right, so there's other AutoPkg presentations at this conference. One of them's already been delivered, so you're going to need a time machine, or you're going to have to wait for the YouTube recording. So you've already missed that one. There's 3 more coming up. This from Mac to Windows expanding AutoPkg's reach is really exciting to me, since it's about using AutoPkg for more than just the Mac, which obviously I'm very passionate about. I've been attending Penn State Mac Admins for about 10 years, or 10 times, more than 10 years. And I've given, I think, about 6 talks at the conference so far. And 4 of those talks have been on, well, this will be the 4th one on AutoPkg. But in all this time attending Penn State Mac Admins, I just kept hearing about AutoPkg over and over and over again. Every single conference there was talks on it, and I kept just constantly hearing about it. And it probably took me a few years to be like, I should probably look into this AutoPkg thing. Maybe it's useful, because I keep, everyone keeps talking about it. So hopefully this will be one of those talks for you that will inspire you to pick up AutoPkg as well if you're not already using it. So who am I? I started on help desk, like probably many of you have. Then I became like a systems administrator. And now I'm kind of a DevOps software developer type person. I work a lot in automation of all kinds, and AutoPkg is just one of the many tools that I use for automation. I'm very passionate about automating things. If I have to do the same thing 3 times, I'm already like halfway through automating it, because I don't want to do it a 4th. So please ask questions anytime during the talk. Feel free to shout out things, ask questions, clarify things that you're not sure of. So who here has used AutoPkg before? Okay, so probably most of you. Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone who's not used AutoPkg before? Okay, wow, decent amount too. Not quite 50-50, but decent amount. Who is interested in using AutoPkg for Windows specifically? About a third. Who is interested in using AutoPkg for Linux? How many realized that using AutoPkg for Windows or Linux was even possible? Okay, interesting. So why use AutoPkg? Does anyone have like a good answer of like why someone might want to use AutoPkg? Anyone want to volunteer an answer? Here. Oh, sorry. Where did that go? That's all right.
It saves you a lot of time, so you don't have to manually import. Assuming you use Monkey, so you don't have to manually import apps into your Monkey repository.
Yeah, so it saves steps, saves manual steps, things that would take time to repeat over and over again, things like that. Anyone else have an answer to that? Okay. Oh, got one over here. Green shirt.
All right.
The community.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a huge factor. Is anytime you have a big community around something, that means you don't have to do it yourself. And I think that's also kind of my point with a lot of what I'm presenting and talking about, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't even have to know how all of this stuff works. You just need to know that someone else has solved it and you can use that yourself. And as long as you can make use of what other people have done, you can just extend it from there and build on top of that. So don't feel like you have to know how to write Python just because AutoPkg is written in Python, because really you just need to use recipes and use what AutoPkg gives you. Most of the time you'll never need to write code at all when using AutoPkg, which is great. So why AutoPkg? So AutoPkg, it's often talked about packaging software and putting software into distribution tools so that you can patch systems. But that's not really what AutoPkg is. AutoPkg is way more than that. It's really just a generic automation framework. And it really is more similar to tools like If This Then That, or Zapier, or GitHub Actions, or there was a talk on, Power Automate from Microsoft earlier, and that's a similar kind of tool. It's really just a reusable automation framework. And it's a framework that you don't need to use code. You're basically writing recipes, and those recipes are not, you're not programming. You're just kind of specifying what things to do in what order. And it's incredible what you can achieve with AutoPkg with that. So I'm going to demo something here. Well, hopefully you can hear this.
It is currently 85 degrees out in State College area.
So I just use AutoPkg to figure out where I'm located based upon my public IP address, use that latitude and longitude and query a weather API. From that API, figure out what the weather is in the area, and then use text-to-speech to speak that out on my laptop. And I also created a notification. And all of this was done in AutoPkg, and even though I just demoed this on a Mac, everything that just did works equally well on Mac, Windows, and Linux. The text-to-speech works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. The notification process works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. All of it works anywhere. So, you've probably never seen something like this presented with AutoPkg before, but the point is you can automate just about anything with AutoPkg, which is pretty cool. So again, AutoPkg, it's a lot more than just what you've been told. So again, it can check the weather for you. It's doing a bunch of different stuff here. And in this example, very specific to checking the weather, but you could use this same concept with anything. You could marry together different APIs. You parse the results from those APIs. Create notifications, read them aloud. You could send a notification on Slack or Teams or Google Chat, God forbid. One of those many things. So why AutoPkg? So normally when we're talking about AutoPkg, what we're trying to talk about is automating the steps to package and push new software to your devices. So there's a whole bunch of different steps here. And honestly, the hardest step that AutoPkg makes the easiest is there new software? So if you don't have AutoPkg or something similar, how do you know that there's new software available to deploy to your devices when you have 1,000 different software titles that you potentially want to deploy? Are you going to check every single one of those vendors' websites every single day and then be like, oh, hey, there's something new. I need to go do something about that. That is a painful process that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And if you're not doing it, that means that you are going to be behind in your patching and your packaging of apps and installing things. You may only find out about your software being out of date when you have a critical vulnerability, you have an exploit, you have a customer or a user complaining that their software is out of date when it shouldn't be. And that is honestly the hardest part, and that's the part that AutoPkg makes super easy, and I really love, and saves me a lot of time. But the point is, all of these steps are manual processes if you're not automating them, and there's things that you can mess up. There are things that you could do wrong. There's things that you could go wrong if you are doing all of these by hand. And AutoPkg can help you do all of these very quickly and very easily, and all the time. So I have to give this question like, why not use Homebrew? Why not use Winget? Why not use MacPorts or Chocolatey or one of these other tools? I think that really misunderstands what AutoPkg is. These are tools that you can use to install software on endpoint devices. These are all things that you can target with AutoPkg. You can use AutoPkg to build Homebrew casks, to build Winget packages, to build MacPort packages, to build Chocolatey packages. These are examples of things that you can target with AutoPkg. These are not replacements for AutoPkg. Now, a lot of these have very significant libraries of software already in them. And so if they have everything that you need, then maybe these are good enough as is. But if they are behind, or they have software titles that you need that these don't cover, that's where AutoPkg comes in. It fills in that gap, and it helps you do more with these tools and any other tool, not just these tools. But then there's also the other layer of, maybe I don't want to just install the software, but I also want to configure the software or do more as a part of that process. AutoPkg lets you do something more custom, not just install the software like one of these tools does by default, but potentially you want to do the same thing and more. So what is AutoPkg? So it's originally for automating macOS software packaging on macOS, targeting macOS, software deployment tools, specifically Monkey. But now it runs on any operating system for any operating system. You can run AutoPkg on Mac, Windows, or Linux, and you can use it to package software for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And you can technically, deploy that to any tool. Some things are kind of out of the box with AutoPkg, but for some of this, you might need to, write something to work with your specific tool. But once you've done that, then you're good to go. It's written in Python, but again, you don't need to know how to write Python or how to use Python in order to use AutoPkg, because you're mostly going to be working with recipes. Processors in AutoPkg are written in Python, and they're kind of like a way to extend the functionality of AutoPkg. But that's generally something that you do once, to fill a gap, and then not again. And recipes are kind of like what you're going to be doing most of the time with AutoPkg. And at least in all of my examples, those are going to be written in YAML. You might have heard that recipes are written inplists, and people are wrong. Just don't forget about that. Pretend those don't exist, because they are difficult to read, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm very opinionated about this, but I'm sure most of you have who have been using AutoPkg are using plists. We're not going to do that at all here. All YAML all the time, for me at least. So this is kind of the structure of a recipe. A recipe has an identifier. It has multiple processors that get called in a sequence. Those processors have arguments that tell those processors what to do. And an example is a processor can reach out to a web page, scrape something from that web page, and then pass it on to the next processor, which can then download a file or something like that. This is kind of just how AutoPkg works in general. Again, recipes are written in YAML. Processors written in Python. But again, most of the time when you're working with AutoPkg, you're going to be writing recipes, not processors. And honestly, the hardest part of recipes in AutoPkg, I find, is writing regular expressions. Because regular expressions, I feel like I have to relearn them every single time. And regular expressions are quite important in AutoPkg. You use them a lot. And yeah, honestly, the hardest part, in my opinion. So there's a processor called URL Downloader Python that I've written, and it's kind of the key to using AutoPkg on Mac, Windows, and Linux, because it's the only downloader processor that works correctly on Mac, Windows, and Linux equally well. There's a processor called URL Downloader, and it stores information about the downloads in the file attributes. And this processor instead stores it in a JSON file. And the problem with using the file system attributes is it only works most of the time on Mac OS and some of the time on Linux and doesn't work on Windows at all, where this processor works equally well. And part of the point of AutoPkg is when you download something and then you run the recipe again, it won't download it again unless that download has changed on the vendor's website. So that way it speeds things up and you're not wasting bandwidth downloading things over and over again, so that you can run your AutoPkg recipes as frequently as you want, and it won't mean re-downloading things all over again every single time. And this is the processor that makes that work on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So this is kind of the key. And you're going to see me use this everywhere. It's mostly a drop-in replacement for URL Downloader. It does actually store the file system attributes as well as creating the JSON file. So you can use this even on things that rely on the file system attributes on Mac OS. It'll still work, which is great. Yeah, if you've ever tried to do some of this in like a Docker container, that doesn't work with file system attributes. On an NFS share, that doesn't work with file system attributes. There's all kinds of ways where URL Downloader fails, where URL Downloader Python works. So if you're not using this, I would recommend it. So here's a bunch of different processors that I've written and like the count of recipes that they're in. These are actually the ones I'm using for Windows specifically, and my Windows recipes just kind of give you a preview of some of the stuff that I'm using out there. I kind of cover this more in like a previous YouTube video, but it's kind of interesting to see this. And this has actually changed. This is an old count. This is actually from 2 years ago or something like that. So this has grown way more since then, but just give you a kind of idea of like what we're using in our Windows recipes specifically. So this is an example recipe. This is like the simplest possible recipe. It just runs this processor called assert input contains string. It has an input string of 1_2_3, and it asserts that underscore is found within that string. You run it, and it will say, yay, it's found. And if I, change the assert string to like a period or something like that, it would error out, and it would say, hey, that's not found. So this is like the simplest possible recipe that does do something. And I, kind of use this to check my output on things very frequently. But it's kind of an example of a very simple recipe. And then like, here's the actual output. It says like, hey, it was found. Everything's good. And so this is like example output that you'll see on the command line for something like this. Here's an example recipe for Audacity. This is a download recipe. Anything that's hosted on a GitHub releases, you're going to see something like this. One of the things that you find as you're doing this a lot with AutoPkg is there's only so many different types of download recipes, like maybe 10 or 20 different kinds. And whenever you're going to create a new download recipe for a new piece of software, usually you're going to be doing something very similar to another piece of software you've already done. So if you're going to download something that's hosted on GitHub in a GitHub release, it's probably going to look like this. So you don't even have to like work from scratch every single time. Like you really should be building off of previous work that you've done or previous work that other people have done and kind of reuse that and kind of do it a similar way. Any questions before I move on? All right. So now I'm going to get into actually building recipes. And I'm going to show you kind of like how I do this for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And in this case, I'm going to start with Firefox, not because you would need to build this with Firefox normally, because there's already existing download recipes for Firefox. But Firefox is a nice example because it works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And so I can kind of show you how that works. And that kind of thing, which is really nice. So when I'm first going to like build a download recipe, I'm actually going to go to the vendor's website and just download the software and see what that looks like. And then I'm going to try to automate that same process with AutoPkg. So in the case of Firefox, I'd click on Firefox, click on Mac OS, English, and then go to click download now. Well, actually, in this case, I'm going to copy the address. And for some reason, it's putting all this extra stuff after the main part of the URL. So this is a little bit tricky, but if you remove all of this and just get this basic part of the URL, it's going to basically this link right here that I just got off of that web page is going to point to the latest version of Firefox, and it's going to allow me to download the latest version of Firefox every single time you go to this URL. And then if I actually download it and go into my download history, it's going to give me a different URL that's the version specific URL. So if I download this from this URL, it's going to give me the DMG for Firefox for version 140.0.4.dmg, and that's not going to change. So if I keep downloading from this every time, it's going to give me that same file. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this URL in AutoPkg, and we're going to use that to get this URL in AutoPkg, and we're going to use that in our recipe. So we're going to start creating that's not where I want that. I'm going to create a folder called Firefox to put all of our recipes in. We're going to create a Firefox download recipe for Mac OS specifically. And again, I'm going to do all this in YAML. So we're going to download Firefox, if I could spell. Spelling is not critical for this part, at least. Oh, and I do all of my work in Visual Studio Code, and part of the reason for that is, it works equally well on Mac, Windows, and Linux. I have developers developing recipes on all platforms, and so we kind of standardize on Visual Studio Code. And I actually have some niceties in Visual Studio Code to make this better. There's actually like a YAML schema thing here that's actually giving me autocomplete in VS Code. And I don't know if you noticed that as I'm typing, but it's giving me information. It's even giving me, hey, I'm missing stuff in my recipe. So, spoilers for what's coming next. So the identifier is going to be usually com.github, and then your GitHub username is convention, but again, the identifier could be anything. And again, we're making a download recipe, and it's going to be for Firefox for the Mac. You're generally going to have an input section, and in that input section, you're going to have a name for what you're doing. So I'm going to make this Firefox for Mac. Whoa. Now it's trying to helpfully autocomplete things I've already typed. You need a minimum version. This is the minimum version for AutoPkg itself. What version of AutoPkg this recipe should be run in. So if you're using a processor that only exists in a certain version of AutoPkg, generally you should make this higher depending on that situation. And then you actually create what's called the process. And this is what's going to actually do the work. So this all here is like specifying things. The identifier is like how we can run the recipe itself. We can tell AutoPkg to run it based upon the identifier. We can also do it based upon the file path to the recipe. You can do it either way. So yeah, the identifier is important for that. But then the process is like how we're actually going to do something. Then we are going to use the URL downloader Python processor. And then we are going to use the URL that we found through the web page. we are going to give it a file name. So instead of having it download the file, like when we actually click the download in the browser, we got Firefox and then the version number .dmg. What we want is the file name that we are downloading this as to not have the version number in it. We want this to save the software into the same file name every single time. So it's important that we kind of override this with something that does not have the version number in it, so that way we're always saving it to the same place. And that's what's going to enable AutoPkg to detect that this is a new version of the software or not, and skip downloading it if it's not the same. And then something unique about URL Downloader Python is it can compute hashes of the software as it downloads it. So it'll calculate the SHA-1, the SHA-256, and the MD5 hash. And we're going to use that later in our recipes. So we want compute hashes to be true. I don't remember if that's the default or not, but it's going to be very important for our future selves to do this. Whoops. And then it's kind of customary in AutoPkg download recipes to have this end of check phase processor after you've downloaded the software. And what this allows for is for you to basically run AutoPkg recipes in this check phase thing where all it's going to do is determine whether or not there's new version of the software or not, and then stop. So this by convention is there. If you're not using that process, you really don't need this processor in there. But again, by convention, it's usually put there. And it's usually a good idea to have that there. So then we can run this recipe. And it is downloading the DMG. The reason it's not downloading it is because I've already downloaded this. And honestly, I don't want to risk it trying to download this on the Wi-Fi and have it take an hour. So I've already downloaded it. So it says here, nothing downloaded, packaged, or imported. I've definitely had people be confused because they see this message and they're like, oh, it didn't do anything. It's like, right, but that's what you want. You want it to not do anything if it's already downloaded it before. You don't want to download it again. So I can actually like go here and reveal in Finder. And here's my DMG. It's already there. And then here's the JSON info file that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, so it's got the download info in it. You probably can't read that, but it's got the hashes, the URL, HTTP headers, all that stuff. So you can actually inspect that file. And the way it works is, you have the file that you're downloading, and then it adds .info.json to that same path name, and then it looks for that to be there beside it as like a sidecar file, and uses that to look up the metadata. And that's how AutoPkg, specifically URL Downloader Python, determines whether or not the download is new or not, is it uses that metadata when it checks the vendor website to see like, hey, is it new or not? And so in this case, it's not new. It's already been downloaded, so it did nothing, and that's what we want. That's the desired outcome. I could delete that and then run this again and show you that it downloads again, and then run it again and show you that it doesn't. But again, that on the Wi-Fi, who the heck knows how long that'll take. So we got a working Mac download recipe. Now what? The whole goal here is to do the same for Windows and for other stuff. So often how I'll do that is just like make a copy of this, paste, rename this. Put Win instead of Mac. And then inside here, Windows, make this Win. And so now we need the URL for the Windows version instead of Mac OS. So we can go back to this website here. We can go back, choose Windows instead, English, right-click on Download Now, paste this in here, get rid of all this extra stuff that we don't need. And again, here's the Windows version of that URL. And we can put this in here. And then the file name we need to change, so it's going to be like Firefox setup.exe, like that. And run this. And you notice here I'm like in Visual Studio Code, I'm running AutoPkg by hitting run and then run without debugging. That's actually a configuration that I've made in this .vs Code folder. So anyone who clones one of my repos and is using VS Code, they'll be able to do this as well. I have lots of different people on my team all developing recipes together, and this enables them to not necessarily know how to run AutoPkg and just be able to trigger it through VS Code, which is really handy. Yep. All available. Good question. Yep. So it's all in my JGStew recipes repo on GitHub where all my stuff is. But then this is I have like a MacAdmins 2025 repo that I'm doing all this in, and I'll be committing stuff to as I go. And so you'll be able to see like the stuff that I've done here as I go as well. Run. So here, again, it's downloaded this Firefox setup.exe, but again, it's not downloading it again because I've already done this. And the reason why this is working is because I'm using the same identifier as I did last time I ran this. Even though I'm creating this recipe from scratch, theoretically, it's already in the cache because I've already created this recipe with the same identifier and ran this again previously. So again, it's not downloading it again, but it would be if I was actually doing this from scratch. And again, that's very intentional because I'm not risking the Wi-Fi. For that actually working. So great, I've downloaded this. But now I want to, well, actually, let me commit this. Download recipes, Win and Mac for Firefox. Commit. Oh boy, what did I do? End of file fixer. So I have pre-commit hooks that are validating my recipes automatically. I didn't put a new line character at the end of my recipes. And so I'm basically normalizing white space and end of lines for the purposes of having a nice git commit history. And so yeah, I failed my own validation. It's already fixed it for me. I just added the fix to it, and now I'm hitting commit again. And there we go. So I messed up, it caught me, and it fixed it for me, and I just added the fix back in, and I'm good to go. So great, now I have this. But what you'll notice is this recipe and this URL here is almost exactly the same as in the Mac download recipe and the Windows download recipe. So instead of just duplicating them like this, what we're actually going to do is we're going to change this. So what we can do here on the Mac side is we can move this file name up to the input. And so before we had the file name as an argument to that processor, but if we move it up to the input, it's still going to be available and used by that processor. We're just putting it in the input section so that then we can override it and change it in other recipes that are going to use this recipe. Then we can set another input thing called OS, and put OSX in there, and that is what's in this part of the URL, is where it says OSX. And then if we look at the Windows side, the URL is exactly the same. The only difference is one says OSX and the other one says Win64. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change this to be %OS%. And what this is going to do is AutoPkg is going to substitute this part from the input and put it into that URL for us. So instead of hard coding OSX into that URL, we're going to substitute it. And then what we're going to do here on the Windows side is we're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to have the file name up here, and then we're going to have OS, and then we're going to grab that same part of the URL over here. Oh, hey. If I can scroll around here. So then we could change this out to be %OS%. But instead, what we're actually going to do is that still legible? Is that all right? Can you still read that? What we're actually going to do here is we're actually just going to throw all of this away and not use this. And what we're going to do is we're going to call the Mac OS download recipe from the Windows download recipe. And instead of having a duplicated process in here, we're just going to use the process in the Mac OS download recipe, but we're going to substitute in our file name that we want to be different because we don't want to download a DMG for Windows, and this OS variable into that URL. And so where do we do that? Oh yeah, so we're going to call parent recipe. And so then we're going to put the identifier from the Mac OS recipe in there. And that's it. So now, instead of having a Windows recipe that has duplicate process in it, it has no process at all. And what's going to happen is whenever we run the Windows recipe, what it's going to do is it's going to take these input variables, then it's going to pass those into this parent recipe. So whenever you have a parent recipe, it basically calls the parent recipe first and runs the process in the parent recipe, but it's going to use the input variables from this recipe, not the one in the parent recipe. And then it would continue on by calling the process in this recipe if I wanted to do more from here. But in this case, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just substituting in those variables, and that's it. And so then I can run this. And again, it's not going to download anything, and that's what we want. If I mess this up, it would download something again, or something would go wrong. And I can tell here that it's still downloading Firefox setup.exe. You know, it's still putting it in the Firefox Win cache location. So I'm still downloading the file from this recipe, but instead of it calling its own process, it's calling the process in the other recipe. So call win from Mac download recipe, something like that. And I didn't mess up that time. Great. So there. So now I have a Windows recipe. So now let's make a Linux recipe, but we're going to do the same idea. Instead of doing this all from scratch again, I can just copy the Windows recipe, paste it in here, rename it. And now, if I go to download it for Linux, Linux 64, English, copy the address. And so here you can tell, well, I don't know, it's a little small. But the only difference here is it says Linux 64 instead of Win64. So we're going to come over here and we're going to put Linux 64 instead of Win64. We need to change this from Win to Linux. And we're still going to call the Mac download recipe because that's where our process actually lives. But we're just going to override it. And again, this is like Firefox setup.exe. So if we actually download this and then look at our download history, we'll see that it's like firefox.tar.xz. So, put that in here and then take out the version number because we don't want that. Stop this download because it's going to take a while in this case. And so now I can run this and I will get the Linux download. And again, very anticlimactic because it says nothing downloaded because, again, I've already done this just to make sure it works. So again, now we have the Firefox .tar.xz. Yes? Oh, yeah, well, sure. You're correct. I should definitely do that. Good catch. So again, now I'm downloading this Linux thing, and now I'm good to go. So this is kind of an example of how you can do the same process across, all 3 operating systems, all different types. The other thing that's really key about this, though, is if for some reason this vendor changes how you download this download recipe, and I have to update this URL, theoretically, if a similar kind of pattern works, but I just have to change the URL slightly, I can just update it in just this download recipe, and then that will fix all 3 download recipes. So it makes it a lot easier for me to fix these issues when they occur, which is really great. So add Linux. So the other thing that's key here is I actually want to get the version number of Firefox that I'm downloading as part of this process, and because I want to use that version number in my later recipes that I'm actually going to create installer packages for Firefox. And so how I'm going to do that is a processor called Text Searcher. So if you notice, whenever I do this download, and here there's this download URL, and inside the download URL there's releases, and then it has the 140.0.4 in there, and that's the version number I want to extract from that download URL. So that for Firefox in particular, this is how I'm going to get the version number. You do this a little bit different for different use cases, but that is how I'm doing it here. Text searcher. And then input string. And then I'm doing download URL. So this is the string that I want to use, that I want to extract the version number from. And then, there's the regex that I'm going to use to actually do that. And basically going to use this here. This would extract the whole thing, but that's not what we want. So we want to change this to be a regex that's more dynamic to actually get this information. And rather than figure out how to write that right now, I'm going to cheat and just copy from other recipes. I figured out this regex once, and I use this tons of places. What this does is this is the match that will match on the version number, and then it'll actually store it into the version variable as part of that process. And so now if I run this, I should get the actual version number stored in the version variable, which is what I want. So right here, it's saying output, I got the version, and this is the version that's in there. Perfect, that's what I want. Now I just made this change to the Mac download recipe, but now if I run the Windows download recipe and run this, even though this has no process in it, it's going to do the same thing when I run the Windows recipe. So now, when I run the Windows recipe, I get this version number also. But theoretically, Firefox could update just the Windows download and not the Mac OS download. And if they did that, I would get one version number when I run the one and a different version number when I run the other. It just happens to be that they're the same version number because, thankfully Firefox is really good about releasing the same things at the same time. But theoretically, I would get different version numbers, even though I'm doing the same process. And I'm following different URLs and getting different version numbers from the final URL that I'm getting. So there could actually be a moment where I run both recipes back to back, and Firefox has updated one and not the other because they're just in the middle of releasing, and I would actually get a different answer, and that different answer would be correct. So I actually want that to happen, but most of the time it's going to be the same for the same product. That's typical. So add version stuff. But yeah, now it works for all 3 recipes, and I only had to add it in one place, which is awesome. And so if in the future, if I wanted to add other metadata extraction from the process, I could add it in that one place, and it would add it to all 3, and it would just work, and that'd be amazing. All right. So now I'm going to make a homebrew cask for Firefox. So basically the way I go about doing this stuff with AutoPkg is I'm basically going to take a working example, then I'm going to turn that into a template, and then I'm going to use AutoPkg to create that from the template from then on. So I have here a homebrew cask for Firefox. But what you're going to see is this is like hard coded to downloading an old version 127.0.2, and then it has a SHA-256 hash in here that's for that version specifically. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a template, and then I'm going to use AutoPkg to fill out this template. And then every single time I run the AutoPkg recipe, I'll get a brand new Firefox cask for the latest version of Firefox every single time, which is exactly what I want. Oh, and I actually name this templates. And so what I'm going to do is this version number right here, I'm going to change this to version. So this is how the templating variables work in the particular templating language that I'm using. And if you're going to use my processors and follow this same process to use templates, this is like the same way you would do it. You could use your own templating language, but then you couldn't use my processors and my examples to do it. So I would recommend doing it this way, but this is how I do it. And so then I'm going to change this SHA-256 variable to file SHA-256. And those are really the only things I need to change in here. And then I'm going to make a macOS, Firefox macOS recipe for the cask. Just gonna skip over some of the details here. So again, this is the recipe for the cask. I have an identifier that's unique for macOS, but it's for a cask instead of a download recipe. I'm gonna have the same name and OS and file name, so it's gonna be exactly the same. We're gonna use those same input variables. We're gonna call our macOS download recipe like we did in those other examples, but in this case, we still want to download OS X Firefox. We just want to call the download recipe first, download Firefox, and then we're going to use the output of that recipe to continue on and build our homebrew cask. And so really all that takes, and I use basically the same process almost all the time when I'm building stuff from templates like this. I use this processor called BigFix Setup Template Dictionary. It's not actually BigFix specific. It just sets up the template dictionary with a bunch of defaults that I'm going to use, including adding the version number to the template dictionary. And then we're going to fill out the template with the values in that template dictionary and then get our output. And so basically calling this processor called content from template, and that processor is going to do the work of actually filling out the template. And so, yeah, I basically use this anywhere for most of the things that I do with AutoPkg. Is I basically take a working example, turn it into a template, and then use AutoPkg to fill out that template, and then I can send that on to wherever I want and do whatever I want with it. So now I've run this, and I have this Firefox homebrew cask. And so instead of having that version number that was outdated, now it has the latest version number. And so instead of having that SHA-256, which was for that outdated version of Firefox, now I have this. And I can actually come here and do brew install cask and like put in this path here. And if I open up things, I can demo that this works theoretically. So no Firefox currently. Going to run this. It is thinking. There, so it's downloading. So then Firefox should appear in here automatically because I'm running this homebrew cask. Depending on how slow the Wi-Fi is. the most exciting part of a demo is the waiting. Oh, it's still downloading. Okay. Well, it's installing apparently. Oh, there it is. It just popped in. Hooray. Caught it popping in. So now I have Firefox installed through that cast that I just created. Now again, this isn't that impressive because Firefox already has casts that you can install. So you wouldn't have to make this yourself. But if you wanted to customize this cask to do something that the existing one doesn't do that's specific to your environment, you might want to do this and basically add your custom parts to the template. And then whenever you would build this, you would have your custom Firefox cask that does exactly what you want if you're doing this, you know, with Homebrew. So Firefox Homebrew. The other thing is, like, if you have a piece of software that is already in Homebrew, but whoever maintains that cask is really slow about updating it, you might want to not rely on that and just do it yourself. So, like, that's another example of where you might want to do this. So now I'm going to do an example for Linux. Whoa, hello. So much for that baseball game. All right, so what I'm doing here is I have a shell script that will install Firefox. So what this is going to do is it's going to download Firefox. In this case, it's downloading Firefox 137.0, and then it's going to validate the hash of that version of Firefox to make sure that it matches this hash, so we don't accidentally get a malicious copy of Firefox as part of our process. And then the shell script is going to do the install process for Firefox. But what we want to do is, we want to turn this into a template. So how we do that is we are going to turn this into download URL. So again, we're going to fill this out with AutoPkg. Again, the SHA-256 hash. I think we were promised no monsoons, and I think we were lied to. So there. So again, now we have this template. And now we're going to create the recipe to fill out this template for this Linux process. New file. And then this is the resulting recipe. And again, instead of it being a Homebrew cask, I call this like an install script recipe. It's for Linux. Again, we're going to send that same OS, Linux 64 to the download recipe and, download the Linux stuff. And then again, here we have this BigFix setup template dictionary, which again, I should rename. It's not really BigFix specific, but that's what it's called. And then we have content from template, and then we're going to use our, template we just created, and then we're going to get this output. And so again, it's basically the exact same process. It's just we're using a different template and using different template variables, but we're doing the exact same thing. So then with this resulting script that we're going to generate, this shell script here, so now it has the download URL for the newest version of Firefox, and it's got the newest SHA-256. So then we could take this shell script and we could send this to any tool that can run shell scripts on Linux. So we could put it in a Git repo and automatically run it through some sort of agent. In my case, I could put it into my tool of choice and run it from there, and so forth. You could just give it to a user and say, hey, run this, and it'll install Firefox for you. You could really do anything with it. I'm kind of like skipping the step of like really what you would want to do from here is add on a processor that would like import it to your specific tool, or put it in a network share that you would like it to be in, or in a Git repo you would like it to be in. I don't know what you would want to do with this shell script, but but you would want to do more than just generate it. You want to generate it and send it somewhere so then it can be used. And you could stop here and just generate the shell script and then copy it somewhere or whatever outside of AutoPkg, but you can have AutoPkg do that stuff for you as well. I'm not necessarily just showing you that part. So since we're low on time here, I can actually, let me just switch to where I've already finished this stuff. So here I have the same kind of thing, but we're building a chocolatey package. So we have this template for chocolatey install.ps1, and we have this file name here as like a template variable. And then we have the firefox.newspec, which is an XML file that goes into a chocolatey package. And so, chocolatey is a thing you can use to install Windows software, and so that's what we're doing here. We have the version number in here. And then this is our chocolatey recipe. So it's going to download the Windows binary, and then it's going to build the chocolatey package for us in this process. And I'm doing this in a way that actually works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So I'm not using the chocolatey packager processor that only works on Windows. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm using this templating process, and I'm creating, this is creating a folder structure. Then I'm creating the Firefox new spec from the template. Then I'm creating the chocolatey install from the template. And then I'm going to copy the actual Firefox installer binary into the chocolatey package. And then I'm going to use 7-zip to actually build that into a chocolatey package. And so if I run this, it's going to do all that for me, which is great. And then if I come in here, so this is where I downloaded it to, I'm going to reveal in the Finder. So here in the tools folder, which is, the tools folder is a part of a chocolatey package. That's just like a standard for chocolatey. No idea why, but that's the way they do it. And inside there's a chocolatey install.ps1, which is a PowerShell script that tells it how to install chocolatey. Again, I'm sure a lot of you don't know PowerShell. I'm a Windows admin and I barely know PowerShell, but I could just take an existing example and tweak it. And then I actually have the Firefox setup.exe in here, and we'll get to why that matters in a second. Then there's this firefox.newspec file. So what happens is all of this gets zipped up. So there's a Firefox newspec file and the tools folder. Those get zipped up together into this chocolatey package, and chocolatey knows to look for those things. So it knows to look in here for that in that structure. And so if I go up here, this is the actual Firefox.new package that I created using this process. And this is actually just a zip file behind the scenes. So if I say open with archive utility and extract it, then like this is what chocolatey would be doing behind the scenes if you actually ran it on a Windows machine. It's basically extracting this. It's looking inside here like, oh, there's this new spec file that tells me what this software is all about. And then here there's this stuff. But what's cool about this chocolatey package is that this will work offline. This will work on systems that do not have an internet connection, and that's because I've used AutoPkg to bundle the actual binary inside the chocolatey package. So you could actually take any chocolatey package out there that would download a file, and instead you could use AutoPkg to build that same package, but instead of having it download the file, actually bundle it inside the package, and then you could distribute that to machines that are air-gapped, that have no internet connection, or are in some sort of secure environment where they have no capability to reach out the internet, and then you can securely install that software using this process. So again, yes, there's already a Firefox chocolatey package that you could use, but it won't work if you don't have an internet connection, where this does. So this is a reason why you might want to use AutoPkg, even for something where there's already a chocolatey package, and you may never have considered such a thing. So yeah, that's that. And then I have a Big Fix recipe. So Big Fix is my tool of choice for endpoint management. So again, I have a template. This is like the finished template. I have like a version number that shows up in the metadata in a bunch of different places. I have the size of the download that shows up in there. I have the source release date that shows up in there, the time that I modified all this. Then this prefetch is like how BigFix knows how to actually do the download and the install. And if I run this, because this is like my actual endpoint management tool of choice, it's going to generate this thing to install it. But then it's actually going to import it into BigFix for me, and it's actually going to create an action to actually install that software on my test machines for me, all from AutoPkg. So this is really like what you want. You want to, whatever your tool of choice is, you want to figure out how to write a processor to make this happen. And some of these already exist. So if you're using Monkey, already exists. You don't need to do anything. If you're using Jamf, already exists. You don't need to do anything. If you're using BigFix like I am, it already exists. You don't need to do anything. If you're using a tool that the community has not provided a processor for, you're going to need to maybe figure out how to do this, or figure out where you want to send the packages you create with AutoPkg and put it in there. But what you'll see here is it's created this task to install Firefox for me, and this is actually inside of my BigFix environment. Like, it actually has this task ID, which is how BigFix identifies what it is. That was created in BigFix for me using AutoPkg, and it's actually created an action for me to send it out to my test machines, and that already exists. It's already going out to my test machines. I can already see results, in a few seconds of, did this work or not. So I can do the whole process from start to finish, and this is where it really starts to save you time, is where you start automating more and more and more of your process in AutoPkg to really make just everything so much easier. And each one of these steps, you could, if you were doing it by hand, you could mess it up. You could get something wrong. You could, edit something incorrectly, and then it wouldn't work. And this really takes a lot of those problems out of it. So again, I've showed how to do this with Homebrew, how to do this with Chocolatey, and how to do this with just an install script, just a bash script, and how to do this with BigFix. But my point is, you can really do this with anything, but also you can do this not just with installer packages, but with any file that you would want to create, any text-based file that you want to fill out with data from the internet, you can do. And that's kind of like what I'm doing with this, text-to-speech weather thing. I'm basically filling out a prompt that says, where is it? It's current temperature degrees out in city name area. I'm just, I have a prompt that I want to fill out from information that came from the web, and I'm filling it out into a template. And that's really all I'm doing. And you can do this with anything. There might be things that are not as simple as just simple text files, in which case you might need a different approach, but a lot of that stuff is already out there in the community and already available that you can just copy or emulate or do something similar with. So again, that's the concept. I hope that was helpful. Any questions? Yes. Where's the catch box?
I guess maybe this might be better suited for Slack. Have you ever seen any sort of cross-deployment recipe conversion? The use case I'm thinking of is like trying to reduce some of that manual recreation of like you find a a homebrew recipe or whatever term they use that I can't think of for like an existing recipe. So either from Winget or Scoop or any of these other solutions to try and reduce that friction if you're trying to do this for multiple apps.
Yeah, so I guess the question is like reusing existing content, and that's exactly what I did. As I went out and I found a homebrew cask that did kind of what I want, and then I tweaked it to work for a specific version the way I wanted, tested that, got it working, and then turned it into a template and automated it with AutoPkg. So really the whole process here is you start by figuring out how to do it once, the way and make it work, and then you automate it with AutoPkg. So you shouldn't jump to like, how do I do this with AutoPkg? The question is, how do I do this, through files, to make a homebrew cask? Like the same thing with the Chocolatey package. I didn't actually use the Chocolatey package from Firefox to do this example. I used a different one that was much simpler because the actual Firefox one is very complicated. And I took a different one that already exists and I just tweaked it a little bit to make it work with Firefox. I tested it by hand and then I automated it with AutoPkg. So you should either, use existing stuff and then turn that into a template and automate it with AutoPkg, or use someone else's AutoPkg recipe that's maybe for a different piece of software and use that as a guide. Because the other thing I want to point out is, so for my BigFix recipes, when I'm automating BigFix content, all this stuff in here in the BigFix recipe like almost never changes at all. Like the only thing that changes is which template I'm calling and what variables I'm filling out that template. Same with the homebrew cask and Chocolatey package. The actual Chocolatey recipe and homebrew recipe doesn't change. It's the download recipe that changes to change which software I'm downloading, where I'm downloading it from, and how I'm getting the metadata. So in the example that I've shown, I'm getting the version metadata from the URL, but in other examples, I get that from the actual like binary or other things. So that varies as well.
I guess I was thinking more so as like a more generic like bulk situation. So say you find like a scoop bucket, and you're just trying to quickly at least start off a template for all these auto package files and just grab like download URLs or something like that.
So you're talking about using like if a whole bunch of homebrew cask or a whole bunch of Winget packages or a whole bunch of Chocolatey packages and basically transform those into AutoPkg recipes.
I know they would obviously work out of the box, but
yeah.
To get that started.
So that is often what we'll do whenever we're trying to package a new version of software is we'll look up like how it's being done out there already and look at that process and just then adapt that to our recipes. So depending on like how is Chocolatey doing it, how is Homebrew doing it, how is whoever doing it for all these different vendors, and kind of use them as a guide of how to download the same file using AutoPkg. So we do kind of do that. As far as like actually automating that process, we haven't really gone down that path, but kind of similar to what you're saying. Any other questions? Who is interested in trying all of this? Awesome. Who wants to do more Windows or Linux stuff with AutoPkg? Great. Feel free to hit me up on Slack, if you have questions, if you want tips, stuff like that. There's also the, other presentation that's coming up on AutoPkg for Windows stuff. So I'm excited for that. Any other questions? I should show, where's my browser? So if you go to my GitHub, so I have this is my main repo called JGStew recipes. It's not under the AutoPkg org currently, which is a bummer. I should make it that way, but I haven't. But this is where a bunch of my example recipes are. So I have a bunch of example recipes for all kinds of different stuff. Like here's an Audacity example, Audacity for Windows. All the Mozilla like Firefox stuff I presented, it's kind of all in here. But shared processors is where all my processors are. And I have processors for like everything you could ever imagine. I create processors all the time. So if you ever have like, oh, I wish I could do this with AutoPkg, check here, and I may already have a processor for it. And every single one of these works exactly the same on Mac, Windows, and Linux, except for this very last one here at the end called WinGetProperty MSI. That one only works on Windows, but I have an equivalent that works cross-platform that's named something else, and I don't remember where. But yeah, so I will develop on Mac OS or Windows, and then I'll run all of my recipes on Ubuntu. So I actually, run all this stuff everywhere. So that means my processors have to work the same everywhere. And that's, what I do. Yeah. But yeah, all of these run other places. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention that I totally forgot until just now this second is, how I've been like committing these things as I go and submitting them and stuff like that? I actually have a CI/CD process that runs all of these in GitHub Actions as I was going. So, I said like add Linux. And if I come in here, this is actually like running on Microsoft's technology. So this is running the Linux download recipe. And, here it downloaded the Linux download recipe. And I basically have something in my CI/CD process that automatically figures out which recipes have been changed and runs only those recipes. So that as I'm testing and developing things, not only am I testing it locally on my machine, but it's running on GitHub Actions on an Ubuntu runner for me. So I can come here and I can check like, hey, this worked. So here, like it downloaded the firefox.dmg, it generated the Firefox cask, and I could even like build something specifically to actually test that cask and all that kind of stuff. So you can go really far with this stuff. So I'm running AutoPkg generally in GitHub Actions once I'm actually like automating this stuff. But what's cool about that is that means I can do anything AutoPkg can do or anything GitHub Actions can do in a GitHub action. So I have kind of like the full suite of everything people have figured out in processors and AutoPkg, but also all of the, like if you've ever used GitHub Actions, you can use community-based actions where people in the community have created GitHub Action steps, and you can use their steps to kind of like set up the environment or configure things or do all kinds of stuff. And so I can use everything that anyone's ever done with AutoPkg and anything anyone's ever done with GitHub Actions, and I can do that in the same GitHub action. And so I have the ability to do all kinds of different automation that's just very open-ended and can do lots of great stuff. Have I helped you think a different way about AutoPkg and kind of what is possible, I hope? I think sometimes it's fun just to like figure out something silly that you can do and mess around with. So like another one here is there's something called no as a service. So it just gives you a response to say no in a nice or mean way.
I'd come, but Nostradamus predicted I'd say no.
So I have it, showing up as an actual notification. And if I run this again, it'll give me a different way to say no, which is just something silly.
I've dedicated that time to an ice cream in need of company.
Wow, that's very appropriate for here at the creamery. So yeah, in every single one of these, I have it showing up as like a notification. So if for some reason you ever wanted AutoPkg to talk to you and tell you status, it could do that. If you wanted to send you a notification, it can do that. If you wanted to send you a Slack message, a Teams message, a Google Chat message, it can do all those things too. It could send you an email, I guess. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but sure, you can. So not just thinking about how to package software, but then how to help you with that process, notify you if something failed, notify you that things succeeded, kind of like the whole life cycle of creating it, automating, installing, and testing packages. Or whatever you want. It doesn't even have to be a package. It could just be a nice way to say no to somebody that involves ice cream. All right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you so much.